Hello everyone, I just thought I'd point this out. We've just had another timing chain snap. The car was driving along and it just cut out. The chain's completely snapped. But this chain, it's actually just here, it's kind of snagged. So I can't pull it out. It's stuck in there, but more to the point, the actual camshaft, the exhaust camshaft, where the little gear goes on that the chain runs around, has actually snapped. It's actually cracked in half. Just, where's my tool? Just in there. Let me get a screwdriver. Yeah, just there. It's actually that little cog that the chain runs on. It's actually cracked there. Completely cracked. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get this top cover off, then we'll investigate further, but whatever way we look at it, that's the end of this camshaft for sure. I've just shocked this top cover free by hitting that with a hammer, and it's actually broke free now, so this can come off. But what I'm interested in is how bad this camshaft is. It's like that chain is actually lodged in there. I can't move it. So I think if I get hold of the camshaft somewhere along the line and try and jiggle it out. I've never had this before. Not where the actual, oh my god. That's it, we're out. Let's take a look at this. Bench. Yeah, wow, that is completely shattered there. Unbelievable. And that is the end of that camshaft. That chain must have gone, just snapped and actually lodged itself in there. Oh bloody hell, look, it's taken off some teeth as well. Teeth off the sprocket are gone. So yeah, nice bit of destruction. The question I've got is now, have we got any broken rockers down here? That's that gasket. I'm going to have to check all these rockers now and see if any of them are bust. Generally speaking, I'll be lucky if we even get one broken rocker when the chain goes. If the cam belt was to have stripped teeth, it'll probably do all 16 rockers, it will snap them all. But I've had a lot of chains break now, and I think at the most I've had like one or even two rockers broken. So I'm going to take all these exhaust rockers out, I'm going to check all the inlets as well, and see if we've got any more damage. But as it stands, it just looks like the chain is toast. The tensioner is definitely screwed, although there was a bit of the tensioner, the plastic guide, still up there, so I don't think it's long happened. So that'll, yeah, nice. The other end of the lights, and it's not so bad. Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll get all these rockers out now, and the other camshaft, and tensioner, and have a look for any more damage. So I've inspected all these valves as best as I can. I mean, well, the valve springs. I can't see anything untoward down there. Everything looks okay, but I have to say I've never ever had a broken or a bent valve on one of these engines. The rockers are designed to break right in the middle if anything was to go wrong, like a stripped cam belt. So far, Peugeot's idea of breaking the rockers has been doing its job. Now, as for all the exhaust rockers, see, they would crack right in the middle there, and that would be it. That would be the end of it. But all 8 exhaust rockers are fine. All 8 inlet rockers, I've inspected them both sides as well. They're all perfectly fine as well. The only thing I found on this very end one is the little bit in the end there where the valve stem sits on it. It's a little bit worn, there's a bit of a recess there. So I'm going to replace this one. They kind of get hammered. So I'll change that one and that'll be it. So really all I've got to do is find myself another camshaft, and I think I've got a spare one. We've had a few engines with strips that have been knackered, but the camshafts have still been good. So I'm going to look in my bag of bits and see if I can find another one of these. Actually, before I go and grab another camshaft, if I can find one, the tensioner, there's the top bit of the guide. The actual bottom bit was still intact, so I don't think this has long happened. The spring is still intact. Them springs normally break like into 3 or 4 different pieces. So the actual tensioner is actually not really that bad at all. So I think what's happened is that plastic bit has got worn to the point where it snapped off. The chains then got snagged on here, then obviously snapped, and then got jammed. Got jammed while the engine was still turning, and bloody cracked that. And that, there's a tooth there, you can see. I'll get my finger out of the way. There's a tooth. It's actually cut, cracked right through where that tooth is. Unbelievable. See, that's why it pays to keep spare parts. You know, whenever we get a bust engine, normally with the crankshaft, I generally tend to keep things like camshafts. And this one here, it actually looks okay. But I've just put it up to the old camshaft, and where you've got the mark at the top, just there, I've just realised this old camshaft, the actual sprocket's loose. It's moving on the bloody camshaft. So when that mark is at the 12 o'clock position, at the back of the camshaft, you have that slot there where your pump drive goes into. That should be facing like up as well. So yeah, what I'm going to do, I'm going to stick this camshaft in now and put it all back together. And I've got a new rocker. It's not a new one, it's a used one, but it's in much better condition than that one. So that one can go in the scrap pile, and that will replace it. Right, ready to fix it back together then. I know I've shown this 1,000 times before, but that's our chain all fitted onto our sprockets. Note how the gold links go on the little marks. There's only 2 gold links, so you level them up with the marks on the camshaft sprockets. You'll put the tensioner in place before you actually put it on the car. And then at the back of the camshafts, both of these where your pump drive goes in, there's another slot on the inlet camshaft. They're both at the 12 o'clock position. Okay, ready to stick it back on the car then. Okay, we're all back in place. I've rechecked the marks are still on the copper washers. You never know, do you? But there's a few things I'm going to do here. Number one, I've actually put an airline down here where the injectors go and blown out the holes, and make sure at the bottom where the injectors seal on the copper washers that it's all nice and clean down there. We don't want any crap. So they're all cleaned out. This surface is all cleaned up and I'll put brake cleaner on it, anti-grease degreaser. So I'm going to put some sealant on here, all the way, a little thin bead of sealant, not too much, just a very thin bead of sealant all the way around, which I'll put on in a minute. So then we'll put our cover back on. But before I do that, very important, get your oil can and give a generous topping of oil all over the tensioner, the chain, and also over your camshaft journals there. You want to make sure they're all oiled, because when you start this engine up from cold, this little bit of oil will help it'll stop excessive wear, if you know what I mean, because you'll have a little bit of oil here to start with. You don't want them to be dry. You don't really want to wait for the engine oil pump to pump the oil all the way up here to get to these journals. You want it to be at least wet with oil to start with. So I'll give them all a good little dousing in oil. Make sure that chain's got plenty of oil on it. And also, which I'll do in a minute, when the cover's all bolted back on, this little plastic handle here. This is to release the tension on the tensioner. The tensioner is still closed up, so the chain's still loose. But what will happen is, when I bolt this camshaft back down with the cover, when it's all bolted back down, I will then turn this, I think it's 90 degrees clockwise, and then that will release the tensioner and the chain will be nice and tight. There you go, Wynn's black gasket maker. But make sure you put a thin bead, not a thick bead. You don't want too much, or otherwise you can get sealant going into the engine and getting things blocked up like oil ways, and you don't want that to happen. So now that our sealant is all the way around, there is one more gasket that I have to put on. There we go. Mustn't forget that gasket. You kind of put it in place. You can put a bit of touch of sealant if you want to hold it in place, but once I put the cover on, there's an oil way goes through there, you see, but once I put this cover back on, I'll put a couple of the injector clamp bolts through to hold this into place while I tighten the cover up. Just make sure all the mating surfaces are nicely cleaned up, and on she goes. Nice and gently does it, and that should almost, if it's all been assembled right, it should almost go straight down like that. So now, time to pop all the bolts in, and I will put the oil seal in after it's all bolted down. But there's one thing I'm going to say here, which when I get all the bolts in this cover, before I tighten it fully down, the actual brake vacuum pump that goes here, and there's another cog unit that bolts onto here, you want to put them in before you've tightened everything down fully, because you may well find, if you tighten the entire cover down properly, that you won't be able to get these pumps in. They may well go in, but chances are they won't. So while there's still a tiny little gap here, and this cover's almost bolted down, then try and fit your pumps. You haven't got to bolt the pumps up or nothing, just as long as they're in the holes. Then when you actually bolt this down fully, at least your pumps will be in and secure, and then you can sort of like bolt them on afterwards. I've placed all the bolts in the holes, nothing's actually screwed in yet, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to start tightening all these down. There's about 33 flipping bolts here, so it helps if you've got like a air ratchet. And anyway, I'm going to start from the middle ones, and then I'm going to work my way out. So you'll soon find your routine, but basically if you work from the centre and work your way outwards, and once you've got them all bolted down, then go over them again 2 or 3 times, because what you'll probably find is the ones you've just tightened down, once you tighten down the outside ones, the centre ones could come a little bit loose again. So anyway, I shall crack on. So my rocker cover's nearly bolted down, but not quite. It's still a little bit on the loose side. This cog unit, this is a bit of a pain, because you've got an oil feed here, and they always leak from just there. It's like a metal crush up gasket, but they always tend to leak here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a little bit of sealant, just a little bit. Don't get too much, because you don't want sealant to go into that hole. And I'll smear it around like so, and I've actually put the sealant on both sides of that gasket, so that might help a little bit to stop it leaking. And one other thing, there's this piece here that goes into the end of your camshaft, so before you put that cog unit back on, don't forget to refit this back in your camshaft, because if you do, your car ain't going to be going nowhere. That's our little extension piece in place now. Make sure that's fitted nice and flush inside the back of that camshaft. And then we can take our little cog unit, my God, and kind of like, how can I put it, move that to the level position, so it's going to slot in the back of the camshaft, and then we can fit our cog unit back in. and that should you can actually move the cog with your fingers to get it levelled up properly. That's gone in. That's gone in with a few taps of my palm. Perfectly lined up in the back now. But the thing is, you don't have to put the bolts in at the moment. The main thing is, once you get this top cover all bolted down, then you can put the bolts in. Because if you try and put the bolts in this first, with this cover a little bit loose, you may well find you won't be able to get one of these bolts in properly. It won't level up because the cover's still sticking up a little bit. So I'll bolt the rest of this cover down. Well, actually, before I do that, I'll put the actual brake vacuum pump in. I won't show that, but it's the same principle as this one. Bolt all this down, then I'll bolt these vacuum pump up and this cog unit up. We're all bolted down now, all 33 of them, well, apart from one which I've got to do with a wobbly bar. But I'm going to show you now the actual sequence of what bolts you're supposed to do at a time to actually get this down properly. And also, if you want to know the torque wrench settings for these little bolts, they're in two stages. The first is 5 Newton meters, and then it's 10 Newton meters, and that's it. Our brake vacuum pump and our cog unit are all fitted in the back now. All the bolts fit nice and easily, so that's good. So what I've got to do basically is get the camshaft sprocket back on, get the cam belt back on, get that all timed up, and then I've got to set the camshaft up. I've shown this in other videos anyway, so I'm not going to bother. But once the cam belt is all on properly, you turn the actual camshaft round just a little bit so that this little hole is around about 6 o'clock position. And that, if I can find my torch, I could probably show you this. There. Just down there, there's a little pinhole just there. And what you do is, you get that little hole on that cam sprocket, that little one there, and you line that up at the 6 o'clock position with that little hole down there. And then you put a pin in there. You don't have to put, you can use a mirror actually. In actual fact, it's a lot easier putting a mirror down here so you can see where the hole is through the sprocket. And once that's lined up, you then put your pump in the back of this sprocket unit. But you've got to make sure that the little dot on this sprocket here, wherever it is, oh, it's around this way. There it is. There's a tiny little dot just there, and that's got to line up with the dot here. And once that camshaft sprocket's lined up, then you'll have them two dots lined up on this, and then you can slide your pump in. I just hope this is going to run again, because I never saw the engine run. It just cut out on the road. But I've said this in previous videos. When we've removed the injectors sometimes to do like a chain job, you put the injectors back in the same holes they come out of, but they just don't work again. So it'll be interesting to see if they do work again. I'm going to change all the washers on the injectors anyway, clamp them all in and hope for the best. I haven't got to reprogram the injectors because nothing's been really touched there, but we'll see. There has been a few times where I put the injectors back in. It's running perfectly well before, put the injectors back in and they just don't work again. So it's just a strange old occurrence. Anyway, the actual chain now is quite tight now that all the cover's bolted down. And now I've got to turn this, I think it's 90 degrees clockwise, and that will release it. There, that's released. Now that's all loose and floppy, and the actual the spring pressure is actually on the chain now from the tensioner. But there's also an oil feed going through that tensioner as well. The spring just compensates for it. So that's all ready to rock and roll. So I'm going to get the rest of it all bolted up, and then hopefully it will start up. Well, this is it. We're all finally back together. New cam belt, tensioner, water pump, new auxiliary belt. Cam belt's all timed up. The high pressure pump is all timed up in line with the camshaft. So You know, this is always the dodgy bit when you put everything back together. I've replaced the engine oil filter, I've replaced the engine oil, new coolant. I've gone over the engine 3 times to make sure all the pipes and wires and everything's connected back up. So I haven't actually turned the ignition key yet, but I have switched the ignition on and off half a dozen times to kind of like prime the system. So here we go. The little spanner light is showing is because the fuel filter has been changed, and well, obviously there's low pressure in the low pressure system. So let's see what happens. Well, it didn't start as quick as the last one, and this is always the worry. Just check under there. This is always the worry, because I've had these injectors out, and I think these injectors, apart from one of them, are probably the original ones. So there's a possibility they're not going to go. And I've had this a number of times before. You'd have to replace all the injectors. Whoa! I was getting a bad feeling, you know, that it wasn't going to go. But it's up and running. And do you know what the funny thing is? For a car that's done, what the hell has it done? 289,000 miles. Well, it's not the highest mileage one, but it sounds really nice. Well, for one of these Peugeot diesels, a bag of bolts, it actually does sound quite smooth. Obviously now the chain's done, I'm impressed. I'm impressed it's actually running on 4 cylinders. I was kind of figuring it either won't go and I'll have to change all the injectors, or it'll be misfiring and I'll have to change at least 1 or 2 of the injectors. But no, it seems sweet. Sweet as a nut. Let me just give it a rev. Sounds nice. I'll reset that oil change required. Well, super bloody duper. It's running. I don't actually know why I made this video. Maybe I just wanted you all to share in the whole experience of yet another timing chain replacement. Now, to be honest, all I wanted to really show was that bloody cracked sprocket on that camshaft. That's the first time I've had that. I've had a tooth broke off on them camshafts before, but not the whole sprocket snapped like that. So that was a funny one. Anyway, it's all up and running. It seems to be running bloody lovely. I'm really surprised. So, what else can I say? Oh yes, I'm using my Canon SX40HS camera right here. It's a very old camera, but I thought I'd try it out. The battery still works. It's about 10 years old, you know, or more. So yeah, it still seems to work pretty good. Anyway, that's it, and thanks for watching, guys. And I'll see you all in the next one. Adios.